Yeah, it's early, isn't it? So let's see here. I'm going to talk about RFID. Have you guys heard of this before? No? Oh, it's a shame. So, no projection. Of course, it doesn't help that I walk in 30 seconds before my talk, so, All right, so let's talk a little bit about disclaimers. Don't believe anything I say. Have you heard that line here before? Okay, yeah, I'm full of crap, and it's really early, so feel free to throw crap at me, and if I don't get a handful of shmoo balls to throw at Bruce later, I'm going to be really disappointed. I don't have to pay $1 for them, so let me have them. All right. Let's see. A lot of this work is done at HackerBot Labs. For folks that were at the Hack DC party, I run a similar lab out in Seattle. We work on all kinds of different things. A lot of it's more, a little bit more dangerous than what Hack DC is usually involved in, but regardless, we work on a lot of different technology and innovation. So let's see. I don't have a point yet. Sorry. Let's move on. History of RFID. This was actually sort of amusing for me to learn. During World War II, like the first sort of RF-based identification was actually done using planes. They would shoot radar at planes. They could see them pop up on the screen, all these bogies, and they transmit a signal to all of their friends. And the Germans would basically just do a roll all synchronously. That would change the phase of the RF signal coming back, and they'd be able to identify friend or foe. That was the basis of the current transponder system they use in airplanes today was, a friend or foe type identification. So later, we got some patents about some real stuff. It's all pretty drab. Okay. Do you guys know how RFID works, basically? Yes? No? You guys awake? All right, so you basically energize an antenna. In passive forms, you energize an antenna on a card, and then from there, that enables you to basically run some sort of microprocessor, and that can be anything from something very simple that spits back information to like a full-fledged microprocessor running Java. So that data is then read back by the same antenna. So passive systems do not use any form of external power. They're powered over RF. Active systems generally have a battery of some kind. But that's all pretty boring, right? Within RFID, it's evolved from, the electronic article surveillance. So if you guys must have seen this. You walk into Best Buy, and if you don't get your stuff deactivated, you end up beeping at the gate, right? Okay. I remember as a teenager, I took great joy in ripping the tags off of things and sticking them on suspecting parents in their strollers just so they'd beep when they push their kids through, which is really quite a bit of fun. But beyond that, it's also used for access control, all kinds of different inventory systems, and now we're getting into this somewhat new category of things called the contactless smart cards. We've had smart cards for a while. Your SIM card is technically a smart card, but now this has been sort of bolted on to RFID. So the capabilities you've had in a smart card to do real crypto and things of that sort is now become contactless, or near field communication is another term that's been coined by the industry. You end up with a lot of different vendors all trying to get traction in this area because they think there's big money in it. So they try to do that a bunch of different ways, but they just seem to churn out new terms for the same technology on a pretty regular basis just to give the appearance that they're doing real innovation. But, okay. Article surveillance, we've been over. Access control, okay. So lately, I've been collecting RFID tags by the thousands from all kinds of different sectors, transit, access control, payment systems, things of that sort. I went on this mission to actually target the top 50 companies on the NASDAQ to get their employee badges. So, does anybody work for a company that's on the NASDAQ? Anybody? Nobody. What are you guys, all laid off at this point? Okay, so about 80% of the companies on that list use a form of access control that can be readily cloned. That's the reality of the situation. You look at things like HID, which is the card here, second one over from your left. HID cards are really prevalent. There's also Mango, and a bunch of other sorts of what are just called passive, cards. These run at a very low frequency. Tools for reading this stuff is fairly accessible. This is a commercial product that can reprogram cards. The protocols are fairly well known, but really obscure for talking to the readers. But at the end of the day, when you actually look at raw data, this data you're looking at here is coming out of a product called the Proxmark 3, which you can buy or download the schematics for. But effectively, you energize the card and it spits back data. That's all it does. It spits back a pseudo-unique bit of information. So for all you folks out there that use your HID cards, anybody in here have a HID card they know of? Okay, not with you. That seems smart. Okay, so basically there's a site ID that is usually bound to a given corporation or a set of site IDs, which is a prefix, and then a unique serial number. The way these systems work is very trivial. It's equivalent to having a Unix box with no passwords configured and just a bunch of usernames. So from a security standpoint, these can be readily cloned very easily using commercial off-the-shelf tools. A lot of this stuff is actually wrapped up in patents, which is why it's kind of hard to buy some of this gear commercially in the US, but manufacturers like China, you can go on Deal Extreme and buy a HID cloner for next to nothing from Hong Kong. This allows you to copy other serial numbers and data onto a blank card. So I'm fairly shocked that so many industries are still using these HID cards, but they're out there. If you want more info on that, Zach gave an excellent talk at Layer 1 about copying these sorts of cards. Okay. RFID tags. Has anyone found an RFID tag in some place they weren't expecting? Where was it? What was that?
A backup tape, LTO tape.
Yeah, you said a backup tape. Anybody else?
Poker chip.
Poker chip. That's a neat one. Was that in Vegas?
No.
Huh. Atlantic City. Okay. I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Oh, in a ring in a jewelry store. Interesting. That's a pretty small tag. Okay, so he was referring to finding a RFID tag inside of a ring underneath a jewel in a jewelry store, which I've never seen a tag quite that small. Okay, there are a lot of competing protocols and frequencies used in RFID. A lot of the newer stuff is using either 900 megahertz for the all of the enhanced driver's licenses. For the folks that decided to see this RFID talk instead of the one that's right next door here, they're able to clone those enhanced driver's licenses now. It's based on very different technology than the passports that have been around for a while. The new enhanced driver's licenses are at 900 megahertz. A lot of your contactless smart cards, which talking more about in a minute, a lot of that runs at 13.56 megahertz, running a variety of different protocols. A lot of the older stuff, access control, we're looking at is 125 kilohertz. So with each of these frequencies and modulation types, there's different challenges in attacking it. So I've personally purchased probably 50 or 60 different RFID readers and built a bunch of antennas, and the barrier to entry is fairly high, but it's going lower all the time to attacking these things at different layers. Much like Unix security and other application layer security, we're familiar with best practices and sanitizing our input and not trusting the data coming in, but a lot of the vendors that are making these products aren't even familiar with these concepts at all. So you end up with a lot of bugs in firmware and a lot of bugs on the chips themselves and really tragic implementation flaws. So speaking of implementation flaws, okay, who knows what most of these cards have in common? Anybody? They've been owned. Yes, most of these cards are based on MyFair. So MyFair is a protocol which was protected by really secure practices. Trust us. Okay, so this is a lesson that we've learned in computer security years ago. If you have a authentication protocol and it doesn't get peer reviewed and you just lock in a box and say, don't worry, it's secure. You see big air quotes. I've heard this a few times. It really isn't. The effort here took a lot of work. The folks over in Germany and Carsten Knoll, and et cetera, and Starbug, those guys did a fantastic job reverse engineering the Crypto 1 protocol that was used in these transit cards. The interesting thing about this space is that NXP, the manufacturer, has been selling these things by the billions, approximately. I've been doing a lot of inventory of transit systems all around the world, and the reality of the situation is if you look at the approximate number of cards issued, if they tell you, times the number of transit systems, you end up with a very large number of cards that have been issued. So the prospect of recovering from the MyFair hack is expensive, and transit systems don't usually run on very high margins. So they bought and installed a system that now is fundamentally flawed. That sucks, but there's not much we can do about that other than to encourage vendors to pick products and solutions that actually have peer review and use real crypto. So to that end, here's more information about NXP MyFair in case you guys haven't Googled it or seen it in the news. But okay, here's info. There's the basic protocol for MyFair Crypto 1. If you guys want more info, check out that paper down there. There's a copy of it. NXP has a new generation of chips called the DesFire chips. Hey, Des, have you guys heard of Des? Okay, so the DesFire cards actually are capable of doing AES and DES and triple DES and a variety of different things. They have protected storage areas and actually published documentation on how you can interact with the card. I have just started looking at this card. These are actual scans of the actual chip inside. I'm still working on digging into it when I get some free time, which I don't have much of these days. But who knows how secure their actual implementation is on the chip. My assumption is that you can still extract keys fairly easily out of these cards. I don't know. That's just a blanket assumption. Really? All right, great. I need some more Shmoo so hook me up. Okay, so let's just humor me for a moment, or throw more Shmoo balls. Let's assume for a moment that we can extract the keys out of these cards. What does that mean, right? From the business requirements in a lot of applications that the vendors need, they have to be able to authenticate a user's card or data on a card in a fully disconnected environment. So they're on a bus out in the mountains, there's no internet, there's no uplink. They have to be able to securely modify some data on a card or validate the data on the card, which means not only the card has secret bits, but the bus itself probably has keys to unlock that card. Does that seem like a reasonable statement? So you end up with all kinds of interesting threat models in transit because their business requirements are such that they have to operate without a lot of infrastructure. They don't have a 19-inch rack in the back with all kinds of facilities. So when it gets down to brass tacks for transit, they have some really hard business requirements that are tricky to solve using crypto directly. Okay, credit cards. This is where things get interesting. Does anyone here have an RFID credit card? No? Aw. How would you know? Okay, well, in the US. So if you look at, you guys can all pull out your credit cards now. Okay, and if you look in the front of your card, you'll actually see a small symbol. It looks like 3 little antenna waves, might say PayPass on it. It might be transparent and you can see an antenna in it. So, somebody want to bring one of those on stage? No, really. Yeah, I would love an RFID credit card.
Disabled from last year.
Oh, disabled from last year, perfect. Does anyone have a newer credit card? High balances? Oh, sure, that one will work. Okay, does anyone else have any RFID credit cards I can read? I will not disclose your full credit card number. All right. So I'm going to try and do a demo. Give me just a moment. I'll get this thing fired up. So, in theory, it's disabled. All right, well, we'll do some shopping after the talk, and we'll see how that goes. Okay. Exactly. Of course, I can't see my full screen here. All right, let's see if this thing's going to boot up for us. So, effectively, this is... What's that? Possibly, I don't know. Okay, so here you can see some Python code. This is connected up to a reader. This is technology made by a company called Vivotech. And this is interesting because they make almost all of the credit card readers in the US. You guys may have seen these readers before somewhere. Anybody? Anybody go to Starbucks or whatnot? Okay. So it is disabled. Yes, this has been successfully disabled. Does anybody else have a real RFID credit card? Do we want to bring it on stage? I'm masking significant fractions of the center digits. Hold on, before anybody waves their card, let me make sure I'm running the right version of the code. Oh yeah. There we go. Okay. No, they don't give me these things. Okay, so may I swipe your card on that reader and display information from it? Okay. So this is his name, and I do actually have the whole card number that's on there, and that's the expiration date. So there's your card back. Thank you, sir. You might want to talk to your bank. Okay, so does anyone think this is a problem? All right. So this demo has been given before, but the credit card industry will have me believe that this is not a problem. It's really pretty interesting. I went to this workshop put on by the Federal Trade Commission here, 8 months ago, and there were folks from Visa and MasterCard and Smart Card Forum, and they were basically, pimping their technology. It was pretty interesting. They were also had a bunch of folks from the ACLU and other consumer privacy organizations that were worried about tracking implications and things of that sort. So when it came to talking about security, I basically gave this demo. It's actually the CEO of a company called Wells Fargo who was talking about the security of their cards, and he mentioned read ranges, and he said, between all the advanced security we have, trust us, and the fact that my wallet is so thick, you can't even read it. And he's whacking an unplugged reader on stage. And I just kind of stood up and said, well, dear sir, why don't you come over here and try my reader? And he swiped his card, and I was able to retrieve the same information you guys saw there on the screen. I said, okay, so do I have permission to use the information that I just read off this card? And he said, oh, well, how about I'll mail you a test card. How about you guys don't hang on to that? I'm like, oh, well, why is this a big deal? I thought you guys have convinced me that you have advanced security. Okay, so the problem is a little bit deeper than that. The credit card industry has been shipping several different generations of these cards. The initial generation, actually one of the ones that we just scanned here, actually contains cardholder name and a static card number. That was an Amex card, which actually contains a different credit card number. Still passes a Mod 10 check, but it's a different number that's encoded on the card. Newer generation cards actually have the name purged, and it says valued customer. So, okay. The third generation of cards that they've just started coming out with actually use this system called dynamic CCV. Dynamic CCV is a system where the CCV code that's passed back from the card changes based on a counter. I've started looking into how that's generated. It is theorized that it's based on a secret key. It could just be a simple algorithm. I do not have the details on how to crack that, but basically what happens is when you swipe a card, the CCV value. Now CCV, have you guys heard of CCV? Okay. Let's think about this. Why are they've deployed some crypto on top of CCV, and they have a transaction ID counter every time the card is read at increments, and then the CCV value changes every time. So if we start thinking about what their business requirements are, they need to be able to conduct offline type transactions and also validate it. They also have the need to reduce the cost of the cards. They have to be low. And they also have to be compatible with existing point of sale systems. So within the point of sale industry, mom and pop restaurant has paid for the point of sale system and they don't want to have to buy it again. So that's one of the bases of the RFID system that's deployed here for credit cards, is that the fields that are used are basically identical to the magstripe industry. The track data, actually even the format, is identical to what you see on magstripes. So this add-on they've added to RFID is that the CCV value changes all the time. So when they get the value, it hits their back end, they can validate using some hut somewhere in England that validate that the CCV value that's coming out of the card is definitely that card. There's still attack vectors there. If you clone a given card in its state and then you try and transmit that to another reader, you can still get at least one transaction out of that. So there's still attack vectors there, but until the algorithm that's generating the dynamic CCV becomes compromised, they have done a reasonable job. So let's think a little bit more about implementation. So I was talking with Vivotech. I called them up and said, hey, I want to hear about your technology. It sounds pretty cool. And I was mentioning different interfaces they have. I was trying to figure out how to hook this thing up to a serial port. And the guy at tech support tried to sell me a RJ45 to DB9 cable that was like $300. But in the process, he mentioned that some of their first generation cards, or the readers, what they had on them for the interface was actually just a coil. And I was like, what do you mean it's just a coil for the interface? And apparently you could take a traditional magstripe reader and stick this little coil down in front of the read head, and so when you'd scan an RFID card, it would transmit the track data to an existing magstripe reader. And that's how they'd bolt on the first generation. I don't even know if anyone even bought these things, but their first generation readers just sort of transmitted data over to a magstripe. So when we start thinking about implementations with point of sale systems, the information that is being sent to it is virtually identical. The processing and handling and everything else is exactly the same. So they wanted to reduce costs to merchants so that they don't have to deal with crypto or have to actually have security of some kind. Security. Have you guys heard of PCI? Yes? No? Okay. What's Section 4 about? Any QSOs in the room? Section 4. Nobody here does PCI compliance audits? Not a single person. Okay, crypto. All right, so Section 4 basically states that cardholder information in transit, in particular over wireless networks, must be encrypted. It's pretty strong. In fact, TJ Maxx had their whole Wi-Fi fiasco, right? My belief is that RFID is a wireless network, and my belief is that currently the credit card industry is promoting a product that doesn't meet their own standards. So that's pretty interesting to me, but why would they do that? What happens when there's fraud on credit cards? When there's fraud on credit cards, if I get my card stolen or I steal that guy's card, and I go shopping at 7-Eleven, this actually happened to me down in San Diego. I had my cards skimmed and somebody bought a bunch of calling cards. So who lost out when my card was stolen? The retailer, right. So what happens to the banks? Do they have loss or do they have profit in cases of fraud? Profit. Why do they have profit? Yeah, the answer here was there's still transactions, so all the processors make money. There's also chargeback fees to the merchants. And the merchants themselves actually, they're out of the product, right? They've lost their calling cards or cell phones or whatever, and they've also lost all the money, and they've been charged a fee. And so indirectly, all that cost gets sent right back to consumers again, indirectly. So your 100% loss guarantee really just gets handed back to you. And if you look at credit card fraud statistics, it was something like $15 billion last year. It's a big number. That's a B, not an M. So the credit card industry also profits by basically ensuring customer satisfaction If you call up Amex and say, my card was stolen, you're going to experience something sort of amazing if you guys have gone through this process before. They know that the consumer is stressed out about this, so they'll say, you know what, we'll monitor your credit report. I don't know what credit reports have to do with this, but they'll monitor your credit report for free for a year. They'll immediately refund all your money to you. They'll give you follow-up phone calls. When have you ever gotten a phone call from a credit card company? Unless somebody had stolen your card. I mean, do they just call you to say, hey, how's life? They will do this in cases of fraud on your card. And the reason why they do that is that they know that in cases of fraud, if the issuing bank provides excellent customer service in that instance, that the consumer will stay with them for a long time. They will, because they've experienced this loss, this emotional trauma of losing their favorite, Hello Kitty credit card. But they're really happy with their issuing bank because they have increased customer loyalty. So, customer loyalty. I was hesitant to release the code for this, but for those of you with computers, I'd recommend you download that code right away. I'm not quite sure what's going to happen. But this code right here that you can download will actually allow you to do the demos right here on Vivotech readers. This will allow you to read dynamic CCV data as well as static data, as well as the full credit card name, number, and expiration date. So the reasons why I'm doing this is not to enable script kiddies to steal people's credit cards, but actually I don't have a lot of time right now to continue doing research on this. I've been staring at dynamic CCV for a while. I just don't have time to play with it, so I'm hoping that folks can take this and run with it and do some cool stuff with it. It's licensed under GPL. So yeah, have fun with that. It's hard to find readers, but you can find them on eBay. They're usually 30, 40 bucks. Okay. Okay, credit cards, other form factors. I don't know if you guys have seen these. There's key fobs, wrist bracelets, all kinds of different form factors. I've seen wrist watches and a couple of other formats. That card number you see there is actually my card. You can go for it. Okay. This is where these slides don't make a lot of sense for this audience. You guys are probably familiar with all the RFID stuff and passports, so I'm going to go over kind of quickly about this. But Google Images is amazing. You can get full passport photos on Google Images, which is kind of scary to me a little bit. But when you have things like passports, what's actually in there is something I would probably classify as a contactless smart card. It has the ability to do full crypto. It is not just a stupid device like an access card that just spits out data. So what you see here is these are JCOP cards that are in the photo. The other one there is actually a .NET card. It runs .NET code, which is awesome. So that they have contact interfaces here, but they also have contactless interfaces. So you can run full applications on these cards and emulate a variety of different things. These JCOP cards are used to clone passports right now and run other sorts of advanced crypto and emulation things. The stack is really tiny, but you can do some pretty powerful things. Something I'd love to see is for someone to actually write a fuzzer for RFID readers on a JCOP card, because that could be a really fun project. So if anyone wants to collaborate on that, drop me a note. For the capabilities on these cards, they're all fairly slow and low power, but these cards in particular have like 70K of memory, so it's pretty roomy. You can do a fair amount of work. This is info on cloning passports. Cloning passports, the thing that really amazed me about this exploit was that the only real advantage I see to electronic passports is that the way they actually operate, there's this machine-readable code, right? You pass that into the tag, and then it spits back basically the same information you just entered. If you look at the machine-readable tag down at the bottom here, it actually contains the name and the issuing bank and the date of birth, basically most of the information that's on the passport. The only additional information you get back is a photo, which is encoded in like some weird JPEG 2000 format, and a cert from, in this case of the US, the State Department. And they actually sign all the data that's on there. So they're actually using like real crypto and PKI to sign the data that's on your passport. So if I, change my name to Ra here instead of Eric, then the certificate would no longer line up. The thing that amazed me about cloning passports is that they're not even bothering with the certificate stuff because they're not even checking it. So they have deployed all this fantastic infrastructure for deploying data, but at the actual border, apparently, at least in several places, it's not even being validated. And that's really sort of scary, right? It's like you can have a self-signed passport. Okay, that seems a little scary to me. Okay, people ask all the time about read ranges on RFID. And there's a bunch of people spending significant amounts of energy trying to increase read ranges. And the short answer is it depends a lot on what protocol, whether it's how the modulation actually works out, what frequency you're running at, things of that sort. The longer answer is it really doesn't actually matter what the read ranges are for a lot of these threats and attacks that can be realized on vendors, people that sell product, because as far as like the enhanced driver's license go, they're 900 megahertz. They're not inductively coupled. Like the 13.56 megahertz stuff that we're just demoing with credit cards, that is all inductively coupled. So it's tricky to cause, you think of it as like a transformer where you have two sets of coils and energy is passing through them. The further apart you get them, the less efficient your transformer is. So it's tricky to increase that range just due to the energy losses. When you start getting into the 900 megahertz stuff and the higher frequency things, it gets a lot easier. So I've been spending some energy on building some RFID antennas. You guys have seen antennas and readers, right? They're like this big. So this is one that we have in our lab here. It's a giant stop sign. You can tune it using traditional ham radio equipment. This is tuning using an SWR meter. This is a magnetic loop antenna. We can feed it with up to about 3 kilowatts of power, which is a little bit more than this USB device here. But RFID-proof bags. Okay. With RFID-proof bags and wallets and everything else, when you think about what's happening is it's a radio, right? Do you guys have crappy cell phone coverage down in here? Anybody? Yeah. So we're in a big concrete box, like half underground. We're having attenuation, right? Because of we're half underground in concrete. When you start thinking about blocking RFID, for the most part, it's a matter of either detuning the antenna that's on the tag or causing enough attenuation on the reader that you're not able to read data anymore, or you cannot get enough power to the tag that it turns on. For a lot of these products that you see out there, I'd be skeptical of a lot of them. There's a lot of products out that claim to do shielding, but as soon as you crank the power knob up a little bit, they're not really doing any sort of shielding anymore. So I'm a little bit scared of people having a lot of faith in shielding products. Believe it or not, I found aluminum foil to work much better than any of these commercial products you can buy. So I don't mean to say you should put it on your head or anything of that sort, but okay. That's all that I have for slides. Does anyone have any questions for me? Go ahead.
So what is the range? What have you tried?
So range is tricky. For 13.56 megahertz, with that antenna you saw here, back a couple slides, this has very narrow bandwidth, which is somewhat by design. This basically will allow you to energize a card at about 100 feet away. So now there's two parts to reading a card, right? There's energizing it so it can turn on its private bits, and then there's also being able to read the data that's coming back out. Reading the data back out, because it's on side channels, we're actually planning on using a separate antenna. We know that we can energize a card 100 feet away, and if we get another antenna that's closer to it, we can read data out of it. When it comes to actually doing a full round trip, we're not there yet. We've gotten that working up to about 10 feet, which isn't as large of a number as I'd like, but if you start thinking about credit cards and places like Manhattan, 10 feet is a lot of credit cards. So, any other questions? Go ahead.
You were saying, just on the theoretical, is the data that's on the RFID on the credit
So that's there's been a paper that was published about 2 years ago on that concept. They call that a cross-contamination attack. That has mixed results. It depends a lot on the specific implementation, what generation credit card you have. Certain cards actually contain the exact same number and expiration date, but a different CCV. So if you capture that data and write it to a mag stripe, your CCV is different. So the bank can definitely validate that your card is being read over RFID. And if it's coming in over mag stripe, if the point of sale system is actually sharing that level of information with the processor, then they could say, okay, so there's something fishy going on. But in most cases, they don't actually have that level of detail coming out of the point of sale system. A lot of these things are pretty old, so they just see data, card number, CCV, and expiration date. So it depends a lot on where you're trying to use your card and what generation card you're using. When we start thinking about merchants and their acceptance of cards, the reason why they want RFID is sort of interesting, right? The usage model where it's profitable doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But for places like Starbucks, when there's a line of people all trying to buy their coffee so they can get to work and feel energized, it can be important. So some data that was released by the Smart Card Alliance is that consumer spending is up 27% when people use contactless payment. It's pretty significant. So that would be one reason why merchants want to accept these sorts of cards. Any other questions? I'm sorry, could you repeat your question? The credit card industry wants credit cards. The question was, why does it have to work offline? The answer is, the credit card industry wants people to spend money as much as they can. If I don't have any cash on me and I'm on a boat cruise or something, I still want to be able to buy my liquor, right? So working offline is a pretty common requirement in the merchant agreement. So if phone lines go down or whatever else, they still want to be able to accept cards. Right now the fallback is like these terrifying imprint machines. You guys might have seen them, I'm sure, right? So for contactless payment, assuming they still have power, they can still accept a card and then do offline batch processing. Now, there's obviously greater risk for the merchant, but that's a risk they have to choose to accept. What's that?
I have no voice, I'm sorry. For the RFID readers, have you worked on trying to disable the actual RFID transmitters? Because I know for a while they were talking about putting them in tires and clothes because of Walmart, and people were starting to get concerned about tracking. So since you're working on the reading aspect, have you also worked on the disabling aspect?
So the question is, have we tried to disable? You heard the question, I think. But basically, you can disable RFID tags lots of different ways. My personal favorite is actually a thumbtack and a hammer going right through the chip. That seems pretty effective. But there are software ways to disable chips. One is many of them actually have kill commands that will cause them to terminate. Like the tags at Walmart, I believe, have that feature. And a variety of different ways you can disable the data that's contained within them. So all these tags and protocols, one thing they generally all have in common is a unique serial number per tag. So even if you disable the data that's stored on the tag, you still might have a unique serial number. So disabling the software may have limited usability. You can also just throw this stuff in your microwave, and there's a variety of different ways of mechanically destroying your tag. But
Are there any real-world fraud numbers in terms of how many fraudsters happen based off
okay, so the question is, are there any hard numbers of what percentage of fraud occurs on contactless payment cards? And I actually asked this very question of the chief counsel for Visa and MasterCard, and also the vice president of the Smart Card Alliance. And they said, none. None. Which I thought was pretty interesting. I asked them how they could make that claim when many of the implementations, they can't actually tell the difference between a contactless payment and a regular payment because of how it hits their systems. And I said, oh no, we can tell, but we've had 0 fraud due to contactless payment. I don't know whether or not I believe that. 0 sounds like a pretty low number to me. Any other questions?
In Europe, for some time now, they've had a kind of a two-factor system for credit cards. They have got these chip and pin. The U.S. has been very reluctant to do that. I'm wondering, number one, if you have any idea if that kind of system, like contactless technology, to reduce some of the risks you've seen, and two, if you have any insight as to why we're so far behind the times.
So the question was, do I have any information on the security of chip and pin, and why hasn't the U.S. adopted that sort of system? I have some theories as to why we haven't adopted chip and pin. I don't actually have any data, so if you want me to spew some nonsense with some opinions, I'm happy to. With chip and pin, it doesn't it's not in alignment with American mindsets, right? I mean, we want instant gratification. You know, I want to go buy a car and drive away with it, and I want to be able to buy my coffee and walk away. Chip and pin makes the transaction more cumbersome. I don't think they'd get very much adoption using chip and pin here in the U.S. I imagine people have done lots of market research and determined something similar, but I don't know.
The bottom line is that they lose money.
Yes. Yeah, they'd lose money. Yeah.
As long as more transactions are happening, they make more money, so they'd be losing money by it.
Ken's point here was that they make more money using contactless payment, and I very much agree with that.
If there's 0 fraud, there's no need for the pin, right?
Well, I mean, have you guys ever bought something using a contactless payment card at all? Has anyone conducted transactions? It's pretty amazing because you don't have to sign anything. You don't have to show ID. You just swipe the card and walk away with your coffee. And that's how it works. For transactions under $50, there's no signature. There's no checking ID. It's a very, very fast process.
That's true for a lot of credit card transactions.
Yeah, they've recently restricted that because they realized that no one was actually looking at signatures. I don't know, did you guys see the guy that was doing all the art on the signature field? I don't know if you saw any of his work, but it was pretty fantastic. He was drawing all these doodles and everything else, and he kept escalating his purchases to see how far he could go with, like, drawing little happy faces on the signature field before anyone would say, wait a second, your little rendition of the Mona Lisa does not match your signature. And he had to go to Best Buy and order like 8 big screen TVs all at once. How much was it? $16,000. So that's the threshold before a signature gets checked. So.
I want to clone my own card, and use the clone. Besides the odd stare, are there any other possibilities?
So it depends a lot on what generation card you're trying to use. The JCOP cards actually support the EMV standard for contactless payment, so you can write card information to those cards. If you're trying to copy an RFID card that's using the new dynamic CCV technology, you're going to have a hard time doing that until that algorithm is cracked. But if you were to take your magstripe data, convert it over to RFID format, and embed it in that JCOP card, you can certainly just do that. Any other questions in the back?
Back to the hit cards. Let's say I'm aware of an organization that uses the hit cards and now issuing the hidden identifier proximity cards, so they incorporate something from the identifier NXP stuff. But I know that the older hit cards still can have it. What's the best place to start if I'm tired of being told that vulnerability is purely theoretical?
Okay, so your question is,
I want to run an internal penetration test.
you want to run an internal penetration test on readily clonable cards, and you want to demonstrate that they can be clonable?
What's the simplest place to start or best preference?
I would just buy a Proxmark 3, which is a device that will allow you to read and clone HID cards. That's a pretty straightforward way to demonstrate that you can, scan someone's card out of their back pocket when they're drinking at the water fountain or some other compromised position, and get into their building. So usually the smoking area outside is a good place. All right, any other questions? Yes?
Just a comment about the chip and pin cards. There's been extensive research in the UK, Steve Murdoch at Cambridge, and the system is pretty
Yeah, there's definitely been vulnerabilities in chip and pin. I don't know that the security in chip and pin is actually much greater than contactless payment, but I just wanted to show this data here real quick. This is actually the dynamic CCTV value from a couple hundred reads. I was up late last night just reading my card over and over again, which is really tedious if you guys have ever tried to do this. This is the CCTV data that's come out of it. I've just started looking at it. If any of you guys are really strong with crypto and want to stare at this, I'd love some comments or advice. Crispin?
Is this stuff actually worse than the mag stripe, or is it just not as better as they say?
The question was, is this worse than mag stripes? I would say it's substantially worse than mag stripes, specifically because I can read your credit card information, out of your pocket without you even knowing it, including like your name, as you guys saw earlier, right? I pulled up that guy's name. I could have very well have just swiped this reader past him and gotten his name and credit card information. The attack vectors as a consumer are more significant because you can have your credit card information stolen just walking down the street. That seems pretty significant to me.
Yeah, and if you think about it, if your credit card gets compromised, well, you need to think about all the stuff that you used it. So that kind of goes out the window now.
Yeah, it must have been that dodgy ATM I used in that bar with all the dancing things. Yeah. Go ahead.
Have you looked at any of the microchip RFID new developments that have just come out? Like some of those, there's numerous ones that are starting to be implanted in bills, specifically that the federal government is beginning to actually plant in monetary exchange activities.
The question is, have I looked at any of the new technology and RFID tags that are being implanted in currency? Is that correct? Microchip currency. I'd have to say no, but if you want to send me some tags, I'd love to take a look at them. It's large bills, please. Another question right there? The question was, how do fees relate to how the card is read from a merchant's perspective? I don't actually have much data on this. It's probably in the merchant agreement. I don't know. I don't run Starbucks or anything. I don't really know. But I'd imagine that I know that card-present transactions have reduced fraud, so they certainly would pay lower fees. I find the whole fee structure related to that pretty amusing because all the charges end up just going back to the merchant anyway. So I don't know why they'd pay more for higher risk transactions, but. Go ahead.
If you go to therealcostofcredit.com, they have a breakdown of all of the different fees that various kinds of credit card issuers charge merchants.
What was the website?
I think it's
Therealcostofcredit.com apparently has good information. And if it installs malware on your machine, you can blame her. One question in the back?
As far as you had 5 RFID pieces in your wallet and you were trying to swipe them, is there any interference, any issues like that?
The question is, what if you have 5 RFID credit cards? You're a good American if you have that much consumer debt. So if you have 5 credit cards in your wallet and you try to read it, there's a bunch of stuff in the protocol that deals with anti-collision. And depending on how the reader is implemented, the specifics of the reader and the firmware, they actually send out challenges and then the cards have to implement this delayed response. And then you can query individual cards by serial number. So even if you have multiple cards in a field, you should still be able to address individual cards. In practice, most of the low-end readers that you find in the wild don't actually implement that protocol at all. So if you have multiple cards within the field, it just sort of freaks out. It's like I don't know what to do. I didn't actually read all the docs. I'm sorry, but you can actually query and read from multiple cards within a field at once. So, gentlemen, if you have 5 cards, we can try to read all of them at once in theory. But I have not done this, so I don't know. All right. Any other questions before I? There's one right up here in front.
Actually, this is a point of comment.
Uh-huh.
At Hope this last summer, one of the guys from the Mythbusters disclosed that they had done research on the RFIDs and started doing a video. Went to their legal counsel to identify what the legality was, and they were told by the banking system to stop it and put it in the safe. And just recently, he had to even pull that statement back because they threatened him additionally that he wasn't supposed to even disclose that.
There's a comment from the front here regarding Mythbusters doing work on contactless payment. There's some YouTube videos on YouTube. I don't have any comments on that.
You suggested before, like, instead of thumbtack and a hammer to break the chip, how do you locate the chip inside the card? It's pretty small, so.
So yes, the question is, how do you locate where the chip is on a credit card? If it's a new card and you haven't racked up your debt yet, you can actually look at a light reflected off the surface of the card, and you can see a small indentation in the card where the actual chip is located. Usually it's on the top left-hand side if you're looking at the front of the card upright. But yeah, you can look for a small indentation because it's PVC wrapped antenna laminate layers. Usually there's a depression where the chip is, and you can spot it fairly easily. Any other questions? Right over here.
Have you heard of anybody doing research in attack vectors on actual reading machines? Like, is there a buzzer for them or something like that?
The question is, has anyone started to attack the readers themselves and made fuzzers for it? I actually made reference to the JCOP cards. I think it would be a glorious project to actually implement an RFID token a la JCOP card that actually fuzzed the whole stack and protocols over RFID. As far as I know, no one's ever really looked at that very closely. But I know that these devices support firmware updates over this sort of interface. So that could be a lot of fun, you know, if you want to collect a lot of other people's credit card numbers at Starbucks. Okay, if there are any last chance for questions. Okay, please go ahead.
If you could update firmware, the readers like transmit back, you could upgrade the firmware and that's what you're selling.
The question is, how would you actually realize that attack? Yeah, you could mod the firmware to log all the credit card information internally, and then you come up with a special reader and pull it back out. I mean, there's a lot of the skimming stuff that we're seeing in Europe right now. They actually put a magstripe reader right over top of the existing ATM machine. So when you go to swipe your card, it reads the magstripe. I don't know if you guys have seen this before. And for capturing the PIN, they actually glue a little tiny camera down, point it at the keypad, and actually can watch the key presses. One of the ways they're actually extracting data out of those systems is actually blinking an LED and then decoding the data out of it. So you could do a very similar trick. This thing has LEDs you can control on it. So there's lots of different ways of getting data back out again. Okay, any last questions before I hand the mic over to somebody besides me? All right, well, thank you guys very much for your time. Hello.